Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that, honestly, at first glance, might just seem like some ancient myth. But actually, it is a profound, incredibly accurate psychological mirror for our modern lives. We're unpacking the tragic, yet ultimately redemptive story of Samson. And look, this isn't just a history lesson. It's a deep dive into the very real, intensely human struggles with temptation, discipline, and purpose that literally every single one of us faces today. Right off the bat, think about this quote for a second. His strength could kill lions, but his desires destroyed him. That completely sets the stakes for what we're about to talk about. It's wild to think about, but you can lose your entire destiny in a single moment, not because you lacked talent or opportunity, but simply because you couldn't control what you wanted. You could be the absolute most talented person in the room and still lose your calling to a temporary craving. Section 1. Public strength, private weakness. To really understand how a downfall like that happens, we have to look at Samson's incredible beginnings. The guy was far from ordinary. Before he was even born, his life was announced by an angel. He was chosen by God for a specific, divine mission and empowered with this extraordinary supernatural strength. I mean, from day one, Samson carried immense purpose. He was destined to deliver Israel from oppression and lead his people to freedom. Early on, it looks like absolutely nothing could stand in his way. But here is the core tragedy of his whole life. On one hand, you have these staggering public victories. He tore a lion apart with his bare hands. He defeated entire armies single-handedly. He even carried massive city gates on his shoulders like it was nothing. Everywhere he went, people just saw raw, unstoppable power. But on the other hand, beneath all that physical muscle, there was a really dangerous, quiet vulnerability growing in the dark. He could easily conquer his enemies, but his fatal flaw was that he could not conquer his own heart. And man, isn't that just so modern? We see so many people today build massive careers, gain huge influence, and look totally bulletproof on the outside, while they are secretly losing the battle within themselves. Moving right along to Section 2, the slow fade of compromise. You know, ruin rarely happens overnight. Samson's downfall didn't actually start with a haircut. It started way earlier, with his eyes. He famously demanded, "Get her for me. She looks good to me." It didn't matter to him that she was from a hostile nation or that his parents explicitly warned him against it. That one demand reveals his fatal pattern. Samson was driven entirely by impulse, completely ignoring wisdom. He just chased whatever looked good to him in the moment. And that's the thing about temptation. It rarely destroys you instantly. It's a slippery slope. First, it's just a little flirtation. Then, it becomes a reckless decision. And before you know it, you're in a toxic relationship you knew you should have avoided from the start. Nothing collapsed immediately for Samson, which is exactly why the danger was so hard to spot. He just kept playing with boundaries, treating sacred things like they were no big deal, assuming his strength would always bail him out. He was slowly, quietly weakening his own convictions, one tiny compromise at a time. So the reality is, his impulses just drowned out his wisdom. Desire became louder than discernment. Samson constantly chose the very things that pulled him away from his purpose, simply because they felt good right then and there. And we really need to recognize that this is still a massive danger for us today. Modern culture constantly feeds us this idea, insisting that every single craving has to be followed, every impulse satisfied, every desire celebrated. But as Samson's story proves, unchecked desire will blind even the absolute strongest person. Which brings us to Section 3, blinded by desire. Now we arrive at Delilah. Most folks hear that name and immediately think betrayal. But really, this is fundamentally a story about spiritual blindness. When we hear blindness, we usually just think of losing our physical eyesight. But Samson's real blindness happened long before the Philistines ever touched his eyes. It was a total loss of spiritual clarity and judgment. It happens when you form a deep emotional attachment to the exact thing that weakens you. He became so attached to Delilah that his judgment was totally warped. She repeatedly tried to find out the secret to his strength, and every single time, he just moved closer to exposing it. The warning signs were literally flashing right in front of him, but his desire made him completely blind to the danger. Let's just hit pause for a second. Let's hold this ancient story up to our own lives. Isn't that exactly what happens to so many of us? Sometimes, the very thing that is actively tearing our lives apart is the exact thing we stubbornly refuse to walk away from. And your modern Delilah doesn't even have to be a person. It can be a toxic relationship, sure, but it could also be a hidden addiction. It could be an unhealthy obsession with success and money, or even just a constant, exhausting need for external approval. It is shockingly easy to keep up the outward appearance of success, going to work, crushing your goals, smiling for the camera, while secretly running on empty and losing yourself piece by piece. So he finally caves, reveals his secret, and Delilah cuts his hair while he sleeps. His strength vanishes. The text says he did not know that the Lord had left him. Wow, that is seriously one of the most terrifying lines you'll ever read. It's terrifying because Samson woke up, stretched, and kept acting like everything was totally fine. He went about his normal routine, completely unaware that he had lost the true source of his power. Section 4. Rock bottom and brokenness. Because that kind of delusion, it can only last so long. The consequences catch up, and the slow fade turns into a devastating crash. The timeline here is just tragic. His secret is out, his strength disappears, he gets captured. They gouge out his eyes and chain him up like an animal. Think about the irony. This once mighty warrior, a man born with supernatural vision and a divine calling, is now physically blind, living in utter darkness, grinding grain as a prisoner. He is completely stripped of his pride, his strength, his independence, the applause of the crowds. All of it is gone. Down in that dark, miserable prison, he finally has to face the ugly truth about himself. There was no image left to protect. There was only brokenness. But as you're about to see, sometimes hitting rock bottom is the exact place where you finally get your clarity back. Section 5. The Return of Purpose. Surprisingly, his story doesn't end in that prison. This brings us to the most inspiring pivot of his life. The source material notes this beautiful, deeply symbolic detail while he was in captivity. His hair slowly began to grow again. What that tells us is that growth usually starts quietly, right in the dark. Restoration is rarely instant. It proves that purpose can actually return, even after a massive, life-altering failure. So they drag him out into a Philistine temple to entertain the crowds who are mocking him, celebrating his downfall. They were totally convinced his story was over. But standing there between the pillars, Samson prays a different kind of prayer. This wasn't the arrogant, reckless confidence of his youth. His path back started with true humility. It required dependence and a total surrender of his own will. And because of that posture, God answered him. With his strength renewed, he pushed against the pillars, collapsing the entire temple. His final victory wasn't really about physical muscle. It was about rediscovering his purpose after he'd lost his way. All right, as we wrap up this explainer, let's look at the real warning here, especially in our instant gratification culture. The good news? Failure is never the final chapter, as long as humility enters the story. But unchecked talent? That is downright dangerous. Strength without character to anchor it is incredibly unstable. And if your life has purpose but lacks self-control, it will eventually collapse. Samson lost his physical eyes, but in the very end, he finally saw clearly. The strongest people aren't the ones who never stumble. They're the ones who recognize what's destroying them and have the guts to turn back before it's too late. I'm going to leave you with this one provocative thought to weigh against your own daily choices. What you desire will either strengthen your purpose or slowly destroy it. Take a hard look at your life today and ask yourself where your desires are taking you. If this explainer challenged you or gave you a fresh perspective, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone whose purpose is just too valuable to lose. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and keep learning.